Maybe I shouldn't have made this video. It's pretty long and rambling, and I'm pretty sure the sound here is way worse than my previous apartment. Gah! I'm doing it. Well, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? The Last Jedi came out in December 2017 and immediately stoked one of the most intense divisions seen in any franchise ever. Star Wars fans either loved the movie so much they decorated every room in their house with stuffed porgs, or they hated it so much they burned Admiral Holdo in effigy. But as we approach the release of the final film in the Skywalker saga, I wonder, is there a way to bridge this divide between the lovers and the haters? The Banthas and the Dewbacks? The Lukes and the Jakes? As an enlightened centrist, I think there is. I am a very smart person. Because whatever side you're on, as much as it may seem like the other side is acting in bad faith, and I'm sure there are some trolls in the mix, but I'm talking about as a group, I have to attempt to reconcile the fact that apparently there are real Star Wars fans who actually care about the franchise on both sides of this rift. So I'm about to go through the criticisms and praises of The Last Jedi and try to make sense of them without resorting to classic tribalism. You don't agree with me because you're dumb. Nope. And evil. Nope, that's you actually. Nuh-uh. And the point upon which I think we can all possibly agree, is that if we didn't have all this canon and expectations about how characters should act and how starfighters work and how much training it takes to lift a bunch of boulders with the Force, The Last Jedi would be a good movie. Not a great movie, but a decent one. I mean, when the original trilogy came out, no one got upset about the fact that we didn't have a backstory for Palpatine, or whether Obi-Wan's character was consistent, or whether Y-Wings were the right ships to use in the Death Star run, because it was the first time we were seeing any of those things. There was no pre-existing lore to use as a comparison. This time around, we do have an established universe with, maybe not rules, but guidelines for how space battles work and how much training it takes to do stuff with the Force and not accidentally kill yourself with a lightsaber. For people who like that stuff and get excited from reading and writing Star Wars wiki entries, they feel that for every cool new idea the movie introduces, there's 2 or 3 that takes the established lore and throws it on the ground. But for people who don't care about all that stuff and are doing better things with their time than worrying about the details of a fictional universe, they see Star Wars the way I see the Terminator movies. They're fun with some flashy sci-fi, cool battle moments. Those people found more in The Last Jedi to love than to hate. For that audience, The Last Jedi was a good movie. They don't need to know where Snoke came from, or why the First Order is so powerful, or hear a convincing reason why the New Republic would completely disarm themselves only 4 years after the end of the Galactic Civil War, because they haven't been wondering about any of that for 12 years. Must be nice! But are you gonna tell those people that they're wrong for loving the movie? I mean, they see people hating on the movie and think they're just that, haters, complaining about a movie about space wizards intended for children. I mean, it's all fun and games and magic powers. There's no rules. I mean, why would you spend so much time making long commentaries about something that is so juvenile and unimportant? Why would you do it? Well, I just don't understand. Why would you do that? It's for children. It's just for babies. Now, you might have been able to tell by now that I'm not an enlightened centrist. Expectations subverted. This is now a good video. When I first saw this film, I thought I generally enjoyed it. There were a few parts that bugged me, like the toss, the nonsensical bomber design, Leia Poppins, curving turbo lasers, the nonsensical ski speeders, and Rey showing off. But walking out of the theater, I thought that what I had just watched was pretty good. Luke, as a bitter old man, was a fresh take on the character. Rey and Kylo's Force time sessions were brilliant, and Benicio del Toro's character was an absolute delight. Not to mention that the whole movie was visually phenomenal. I guess for a while, I kind of just slipped into not caring about all the rules and stuff. I actually spent a couple hours after we saw the movie at a Boston Pizza with my friend, defending it to him, while the rest of our group sat awkwardly eating pasta with too much sodium in it. That was a low point. It was only after I had some distance from The Last Jedi and I started to think and talk about it a bit more that I started to realize I did not like this movie. No. Which was like an identity crisis for me, because as long as I can remember, I have loved everything Star Wars. Like, I devoured the EU books and games and animated stuff, and I cross-referenced with Wikipedia to make sure all the details were right. Like, you were gonna try and pass this off to me as a Trandoshan when I know full well that's an Ishi Tib. So wait a second. If I didn't like the movie, why would I want to heal this divide in the fandom? Well, partially because I want to explain to my fellow haters that there are good, logical reasons to like the movie, and explain to defenders of The Last Jedi that not everyone who disliked it is sexist, racist, and toxic. Like, even if you want to put Kathleen Kennedy in a cannon and shoot her into space, we can all agree that's not an admirable instinct, right? You can disagree with someone without calling for their literal death. So in that same vein, the following are not reasons I think the movie is bad. 1. Rose was a bad character and Kelly Marie Tran is a bad actor. Nope. Rose was fine. I had no problem with either the character or the way she was acted. Except for that line, and I don't blame Kelly Tran for that, because that would be silly. 2. There was too much feminism or SJW politics involved. Was there, though? Are you just saying that because there were feminine characters who acted tough? Like, I didn't hear anyone talk about rectifying historical inequities or taking down the space patriarchy. Space triarchy. There are tons of flaws in this movie without me having to color my analysis with ham-fisted comparisons to a modern, real-world culture war. 3. The movie did weird and new things, and Star Wars should just be the same stuff over and over again. See, this, I don't think anyone's actually saying this. And I think the immense love that's out there for Star Wars books and games and comics that deviate from the standard Star Wars formula proves that point. We like new things. Plus, in other ways, The Last Jedi was intensely unoriginal. It copied so much from previous movies, particularly Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and ultimately even reversed course on the whole let the past die thing that the film was working towards thematically. Wisecrack has an excellent video on that particular subject. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about Luke, guys. I'm gonna make a point and then a counterpoint and then try to synthesize it for healing. I don't know if it could work, but I'm damn sure gonna try. Some of Luke's most character-defining traits in the original trilogy are optimism and perseverance, as he steadfastly insisted on rescuing his friends and turning Darth Vader, the most dangerous and feared man in the galaxy, back to the light side. While he was a little whiny as a youngling,
but I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters,
and had moments of doubt, he faced temptation and the Emperor and grew into a Jedi Knight. So Luke's moment of doubt, which led to the creation of Kylo Ren, and his subsequent self-imposed exile, which sees him not only lose faith in the possibility of Kylo's redemption, but also turn his back on his friends, the Force, and the whole galaxy, it seemed like a complete 180 for the character. It's also hard to imagine that Luke, presented with the lightsaber that was his for years and was originally his father's, wouldn't have anything to say about it, or wouldn't even ask Rey where she got it. Like, this Luke isn't just disillusioned with the Jedi, he's also just kind of a dick. And speaking of Luke's disdain for the Jedi Order, it doesn't make sense, not because the Jedi from the prequels were awesome, but because Luke wasn't a Jedi as the prequels defined it. Emotions, good and bad, were eschewed by the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan and Yoda tell Luke to kill Vader, his father, because his emotional connection to him could lead to the dark side. But Luke rejects the Jedi Order's insistence on emotional detachment, and he saves his father with the very thing that his teachers thought would be his undoing: love. Luke had already proven that there's a better way than the narrow dogma enforced by the Jedi in the prequels. So his insistence on ending the Jedi and his own connection to the Force, only to do a 180 later and decide he does want the Jedi to come back, just seemed contrived so that Rian Johnson could deliver his vision of Luke. Okay, counterpoint. Some of Luke's most character-defining traits are impulsiveness and obsessiveness. He ignored the warnings of Obi-Wan and Yoda and ran off to save his friends, only to fail in saving Han and lose a hand while getting his ass handed to him by Darth Vader. He also impulsively tried to strike down the Emperor in anger and nearly killed the very person he came to redeem before coming to his senses and making a conscious choice to resist. So his emotional decision to ignite his lightsaber in Kylo Ren's hut was in character, and his subsequent loss of faith in the Jedi Order was a realistic outcome for a man who had, in his mind, just caused a galactic cycle of destruction to continue. Not to mention that the guy who defeated the Emperor and Darth Vader and was attempting to start the Jedi Order again from scratch would have a lot of pressure on him, not to mention trauma. That could realistically weigh heavily on a person's mind, and it's conceivable that Luke could have just cracked. Now, the synthesis. Both of these points are valid interpretations of Luke's character and what he might have gotten up to after Return of the Jedi. But they come from two different perspectives. One primarily looks at the positive character traits of Luke, and the other looks at the negative. Rian Johnson said that a big reason he wrote Luke the way he did was because it was more true to real life. There aren't really any happily ever afters in reality. Just because you succeeded this time doesn't mean you won't fail 30 more times. And I have to admit, the idea of a failed Luke is interesting narratively. Like, what happens when the savior of the galaxy loses faith? I want to find out what happens at the end of that story. I really do. But I just think it would be better served as a story about a different Jedi Master or a Star Wars version of Marvel's What If series. You see, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been very successful with very little fan backlash. And that's at least partially because its creative team actually respected the stories and details from the comics, even though they're not canon to the movies. I mean, they also had freedom to experiment with changing some details because fans are used to alternate universes and franchise reboots and all that. But what the MCU didn't mess with was who these characters are. Steve Rogers is the same character in the MCU that he is in the Marvel 616 universe. Marvel didn't have to do that. They could have made him more of a badass and less of a Boy Scout. And maybe that would have been an interesting narrative twist, a subversion of the Captain America that we thought we knew. But it wouldn't feel like the real Captain America. We would call him like Jake Rogers or something. Marvel knew that there is an essence of Captain America, the character. And to do the official cinematic canon storyline justice, they need to be true to that essence. And in The Last Jedi, the Luke Skywalker that fans have come to know and love is just not represented. The mainline episodic Star Wars movies are an epic space fantasy based on the hero's journey. Luke's story was one of faith, hope, and love, and to have that take such a downward turn after Return of the Jedi is honestly, in my opinion, a travesty. I know there are no heroes in real life. Everyone has a dark secret. But that's why we need heroes like Luke Skywalker and Steve Rogers in our stories. They fail, but they get better and smarter. Kids and adults can look at them and find inspiration to keep going, to keep trying no matter what happens. It's true that Luke had a really cool ending scene where he had a bedside conversion back to Jediism and allowed the resistance to escape by heroically facing down the First Order, and in so doing served as that kind of larger-than-life role model for the rest of the galaxy. But that kid doesn't know that Luke's final stand was just a kind of a last-ditch effort to make his life not a total waste. But once again, for the sake of synthesis and healing, I can totally understand why someone who's not interested in all the expanded universe stuff and is seeing this movie just kind of as a one-off thing would totally be able to accept this version of Luke as just as valid as any other. Without the original trilogy, Luke is just this guy that we don't know much about, except that he was once this larger-than-life hero. Okay, moving on. I gotta talk about this because I can't wait. The bombers. Oh, the bombers. So I've heard a few people in my personal life talk about how this scene is awesome, and just in terms of composition, I have to agree. It's got some cool space battle moments and a really nice little micro story featuring Paige Tico as she fights to release those dang old bombs and eventually sacrifices herself to complete her mission. If I'm trying to be objective, I love the desperation in this scene, and the way Paige's story was told was tremendously moving. Once again, I totally get why people who don't care about the lore loved this scene, but it was hard for me to actually be moved by it, because the whole time I was just thinking how dumb those frickin' bombers are. Having looked into the new canon books, I know that there might be legitimate logistical reasons that the Resistance didn't have access to Y-Wing or B-Wing bombers, which are much faster and more maneuverable. But even if we say that they didn't have access to those particular models, in what universe is the, I have to check the model name, MG-100 Star Fortress SF-17s of any use to anyone? They're incredibly slow, apparently don't have very good deflector shields, and the only possible strategy for their pilots is to keep a tight formation.
Bombers, keep that tight formation. Fighters, protect the bombers.
Which only hastens their destruction when one explodes and wrecks two others with shrapnel. Sure, just one of them can apparently take out a capital ship, but you gotta get to it first! I just can't imagine a military scenario where using these would be advisable. So why are they in the movie? Because it was Poe's decision to bring them out, and we needed Poe to fail here so he could get yelled at by Holdo and learn his lessons about not being a hothead and maybe trusting other people to maybe have some good ideas for once. That is an interesting story. Honestly, I've kind of come around on the whole Holdo not trusting Poe thing. He did just cause the destruction of most of the Resistance fighters, and Holdo, not knowing him, has no reason to give him any more information than he needs. That's fair, but that all happens because of a contrived plot device. Garbage designed bombers that have no business existing in a universe where Y-Wings and B-Wings exist. If we never knew those were a thing, fine, I'd have no problem with the scene and we could move on. And while we're on this theme of nonsensical ships, the ski speeders. What exactly were the Resistance pilots trying to accomplish by going up against walkers in these things? They only had dinky little blaster cannons, and the ATM-6s and the battering ram cannon were immune to small blaster fire. In Empire Strikes Back, which this scene obviously copies so hard, the snow speeders were similarly outmatched, but with some ingenuity, the pilots were able to defeat the walkers with tow cables. Now, I know that they were trying to buy time by taking out the battering ram cannon, but directly assaulting a wall of walkers like that was simply suicide, as Poe found out. So why did they have to go out there? As a plot device. This scene lets us see that Poe has learned from his hot-headed attack on the Dreadnought, as this time he wisely tells his fighters to retreat. It also gives Rose a chance to deliver that beauty of a line, "That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate, saving what we love." I guess we're ignoring the fact that in Star Wars, in many cases, those two are kind of the same thing. I'm not a space horse scientist, but it looks like you're destroying stuff you hate here. And one more thing, Holdo is definitely doing the same thing here that Finn tried to do, but destroying what you hate is fine here because it's one of the most visually striking moments of the film. It's beautiful. I cried tears, not of joy. Okay, we gotta speed this up. I'm sorry, guys. Snoke. He died without us learning who he was. We need a backstory for him because he's clearly the most powerful Force user since Palpatine, and people like that just don't pop out of the ground, steal Ben Solo's, and YOLO their way to the leadership of Empire 2.0. Palpatine didn't have a backstory when the original trilogy came out because we didn't need one for him. We had just learned there's an Empire. It follows that there's probably an emperor of the Empire. And then we got a backstory for him in the prequels anyways, so. But if we're not taking canon and lore into account, sure, there must be tons of powerful dark side users out there in the galaxy. Snoke is just one of them, and exists in this story simply to be a plot device to explain Kylo Ren's turn to the dark side. Also, his early death was a clever subversion of expectations, like the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, because Star Wars is just like Game of Thrones. Okay, Leia Poppins. Honestly, my only problem with this was the visuals of it. It looked super cheesy, but it makes total sense that Leia would have trained enough with the Force in the 30 years since the Battle of Endor to be able to use the Force to move around in zero gravity. Like, that makes sense, guys. Rey. I can accept that some rando from a backwater planet is abnormally strong in the Force, but what the movies have established is that while people can be weaker or stronger in the Force, that Force sensitivity is not much use unless it can be trained and focused. This is why we see Luke try and fail and train and try and fail and train again. But if we didn't have those other movies to draw on, sure, Rey can lift boulders. Why not? Like if those other movies don't exist, it's like she's got the Force. That's how you lift stuff, right? Boom. The Force, that's the thing that makes you super good at a lot of stuff, right? It's great. All right, at this point, I'm basically just rambling, but there's one more thing that I wanted to address. The humor. And it's not because Star Wars movies aren't funny or I don't want them to be funny. They are funny. They're hilarious. But a lot of jokes in this movie seemed out of place because they seemed to kind of reference our own world, and that brings you out of the immersion that you've established. The finger tickling bit just seemed like an SNL sketch. Like maybe it was just Daisy and Mark's acting, but they both seemed like they were playing dumb for the bit, and the only thing that was missing was kind of like a Jim from The Office style look at the camera, like The clothes iron moment is particularly annoying because it references something directly in our world. We, as the audience, know that we're being toyed with by the movie in that moment, and the immersion that kind of like has sucked us into the Star Wars universe just breaks. All for a visual gag that's like kind of funny. It's like a pun level. It's like it's like an iron. And finally, Luke's Jay-Z get that dirt off your shoulder moment. Like, are we to understand that they have Jay-Z references in the Star Wars universe? What? But for every awkward moment, there was a part that I liked. I actually loved the Poe trolling Hux scene. It seemed to fit really well into kind of the Star Wars brand of humor.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Look, I can't hold forever. If you reach him, tell him Leia has an urgent message for him.
I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
About his mother.
Like, it made me think of the moment that Han Solo tells the Imperials that everything's fine.
Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?
We're sending a squad up.
Also, Finn throwing his paralyzed arm up was great. Poe rubbing BB-8's belly when they're reunited was adorable. And the movie also had a lot of just straight up awesome moments. Like the Force time sessions were brilliant. That was straight up character development, and I loved it. It was a use of the Force that made sense in universe. So, loved it. Like, I remember being excited when Kylo Ren like wipes away the seawater from Ahch-To. Like, I was like, oh, cool, how does that work? So yeah, there were so many cool moments in the movie, but I feel like I couldn't properly appreciate many of them because a lot of them were either ignorant of or in defiance of the lore. And that's why I don't actually hold any ill will towards Rian Johnson, or I'm trying not to anyway. Because I think he just kind of got in over his head. He took a story that he wanted to tell, a cool story, and like clothed it in the vestments of Star Wars. Like, I think he thought he really loved Star Wars because he loved the original trilogy, but when you're dealing with a franchise as massive as Star Wars, I don't know, this stuff is important. So there you have it. Last Jedi, decent movie, bad Star Wars movie. If you're here at the end of the video, great job, you did it. Do you think I achieved my goal of bringing peace to the Star Wars realm? Probably not. We'll have to see. I definitely rushed this video out because it would be embarrassing to, release this video after episode 9 comes out and then have it totally retroactively fix all the problems from The Last Jedi. Because that's gonna happen.